I want you to think about something for a second. Have you ever had a day where the world just felt, I don't know, a little bit glitchy?
Oh, like that weird creeping sensation.
Yeah, exactly. Like you walk into a room and completely blank on why you're even there. Or you see the exact same blue sedan drive past you 3 times in a row, just pacing you perfectly.
Right, and usually, you just shake it off. You chalk it up to a lack of sleep or maybe a trick of the
Such a
light.
random coincidence, right? But if you felt that glitch, you really aren't alone. Today's deep dive is, well, it's exploring exactly that feeling, but on a massive scale.
Yeah, we are unpacking a fascinating stack of recent articles from a publication called The Parallel Observer.
Which, just for context, was created by John Grant, the founder and CEO of InnovateXR, pronounced InnovateXRs. And the overarching theme of today's sources is this incredibly unsettling theory that our reality is, well, a simulated system.
And not just a simulation, but a system that is currently undergoing a complete catastrophic meltdown.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is.
Yeah.
The sources refer to our current environment as the Phoenix timeline. And they aren't just doing some philosophical thought experiment here. They are tracking actual physical infrastructure failing in ways that kind of defy standard scientific explanation.
Right, so let's start with the physical environment. Because if reality is a simulation, how does a system crash physically manifest?
Well, look at the massive heat dome covering Phoenix. Normally, you look at a blistering heat wave and, you point to atmospheric pressure and climate change.
Sure.
But the scientists in residence cited in the Parallel Observer, they're arguing this isn't organic weather at all. In an article titled The Thermodynamic Glitch, Heat Domes and the Limits of Local Processing, they call it hardware throttling.
Hardware throttling, like a computer.
Exactly. Think about the physics of rendering a localized environment. To simulate a desert city in the summer, the system has to generate immense kinetic energy at the particle level.
So it takes massive computational power to render the extreme heat, the complex urban infrastructure, and the behavior of millions of people all at once.
Right. And when a physical computer server is tasked with an environment that complex, it generates its own heat. If the processing load gets too heavy, the system forcibly throttles its own performance.
It creates like a localized quarantine.
Yeah, dialing back the complexity to prevent a total meltdown. The source is suggesting that the heat dome isn't atmospheric pressure, it's a byproduct of a localized rendering crisis. The hardware rendering the desert floor it simply cannot process the environmental polygons and the temperature physics at the same time.
Which is wild. And that computational strain is cascading into the objects inside that environment, too. There's a companion piece called the Phoenix Gridlock, why your air conditioning keeps resetting.
Ooh, the thermostat synchronicity.
Yes, people across the city aren't just dealing with broken thermostats, they're dealing with synchronicity glitches. Entire grids of smart thermostats are resetting in perfect unison.
Because smart thermostats are essentially scripted variables. I mean, they are lines of code designed to read an environmental input and trigger a mechanical response.
But when the environment itself, the localized weather model, is consuming like 99% of the available processing power.
The secondary scripts begin to fail. The central server is aggressively reclaiming allocated memory. So these IoT devices get stuck in these endless reset loops. The system literally lacks the RAM to remember what state the thermostat should be in.
I can actually visualize this perfectly through a video game analogy.
Oh yeah, lay it on me.
Imagine you're playing a massive, highly detailed, open-world game. Your character enters a brand new, incredibly complex desert zone. The textures are dense, the lighting fizzles are intense, and suddenly your console just starts screaming.
The internal fan sounds like a jet engine.
Exactly. The frame rate drops, the game starts to lag. And to save memory and keep the game from crashing to the dashboard, the engine starts cutting corners on the small stuff. The in-game objects, like a thermostat on a wall, they stop functioning and just snap back to their default state.
Right, because the engine is desperately diverting all its power just to keep the skybox from collapsing.
Yep. And it really explains the widespread feelings of derealization reported in their follow-up piece, The Thermostat of Reality.
It does. I mean, humans are incredibly adept at recognizing drops in fidelity. Our brains are sophisticated pattern-matching engines.
So when the physical world stops adhering to the organic laws of physics
And starts adhering to the rigid, clunky laws of computational resource management, people notice the lag. They feel the artificiality.
it feels less like organic weather and more like failing scripted variables.
Exactly. But if the simulation's hardware is failing to render something as basic as ambient temperature, we really have to look at how it handles the infinitely more complex variables of human interaction.
Right, which leads directly into their geopolitical coverage. If the hardware is failing on the weather, what's happening to human society? The Observer published an article titled The Tehran Anomaly: Strategic Friction or Scripted Instability.
And their core concept here is that global hotspots and major international conflicts are actually becoming too predictable to be natural.
Too predictable.
Yet, the theory is that we are looking at pre-programmed loops instead of organic human decision-making.
Okay, wait. I have to push back on this a little bit.
Go for it.
Because humans are, creatures of habit. We are historically terrible at learning from our mistakes. We've been fighting over the exact same borders for centuries. A nation gets aggressive, another pushes back, there's a standoff, a treaty, and 20 years later we just do it again.
That's a very fair point.
Right. So how does the Observer prove this is a lazy, looping algorithm and not just humans continually repeating their own historical mistakes? Are these patterns really proof of a simulation?
That is the crucial distinction the source material addresses. Historical recurrence in the real world is messy. Like you said, when humans repeat mistakes, the variables are always slightly different.
The economic factors shift, the culture evolves.
Exactly. Individual personalities of the leaders inject chaos into the timeline. That is a thematic repetition. But what the parallel observer is documenting in Tehran is a literal repetition.
What do you mean by literal?
The data suggests these aren't organic geopolitical frictions. When they say geometric patterns in the chaos, they mean that if you overlay a graph of diplomatic cables sent during a crisis 40 years ago with one sent today, the timing, frequency, and word counts are a one-to-one exact match.
Wait, really? A one-to-one match?
Yes. Imagine a historical crisis where an ultimatum was delivered, and exactly 72 hours later, a border skirmish occurred, lasting precisely 14 hours.
Okay.
The current data points mirror those exact chronologies down to the millisecond. It lacks the messy, organic friction of standard political history.
So it's not history rhyming, it's the actual code copy-pasting itself to save CPU cycle.
Precisely. Generating an entirely novel geopolitical crisis from scratch requires calculating the individual complex motivations of millions of people. A struggling server just doesn't have the compute for that, so it runs a generalized conflict script.
The system is recycling code blocks because it cannot afford the processing power to simulate free will on a macro scale. That is terrifying.
It is.
Which brings up the next obvious question. If the physical world is lagging and global conflicts are just copy-pasted scripted loops, who is actually trying to access the administrative controls of this reality?
Well, the parallel observer extensively covers an ongoing political and scientific clash over exactly this. Senator Evelyn Reed and Dr. Eris Thorne are clashing over a piece of legislation known as the Clarity Act.
Now, I want to be really clear with you listening. We are not taking sides here. We are simply relaying the conflict over the Clarity Act as reported by the sources. We're impartially reporting on this clash, not endorsing either viewpoint.
Absolutely. The debate isn't about traditional politics. It's about a fundamental existential question. Do we have any autonomous control over our existence, or are we merely subjects trapped inside a nested simulation?
And this fight is happening because the glitches are becoming too frequent, right? The system's truth level is effectively hitting a wall.
Yes, the truth level. That's a metric the scientists in the source use to measure the simulation's ability to sustain a seamless illusion. They track it by observing deviations from quantum probability. As the glitches become more frequent, the truth level drops.
And the Clarity Act, what exactly would it do?
The proposed Clarity Act would authorize massive, synchronized quantum computing operations designed to intentionally stress the simulation further.
So it's essentially a coordinated DDoS attack on reality's server.
Exactly. Meant to force an administrative prompt or expose the base code. Senator Reed and Dr. Thorne are fighting to understand if we can wake up from this.
But the concept of a nested simulation is the terrifying part. Let's use an analogy to explain this to the listener. A lot of people compare it to a Russian Matryoshka doll, a doll inside a doll.
That's a classic one.
Right, but I like to think of it like running a virtual machine on a computer. Imagine you're running a Windows emulator inside a Mac. Senator Reed and Dr. Thorne are fighting to use the Clarity Act to break out of the Windows emulator. They want to crash the program.
Right, to find the truth.
But the horrific implication of a nested simulation is that Even if they succeed, and the Clarity Act helps us wake up from this reality, we haven't reached base reality. We might just find ourselves as lines of code in a slightly larger simulation box. We just crashed the program and found ourselves sitting on the Mac's desktop.
Just one level up.
Yeah.
And that paralyzing fear of what those controls will actually reveal is at the center of the debate. If the truth level is dropping, the boundary between the simulated experience and the base reality, or just the next simulation up, is thinning. The tension reported in the sources stems from this exact uncertainty. If we force a system error to achieve true freedom, we might just graduate to a slightly wider, slightly more complex cage.
Which brings up a very practical problem for everyone currently living in the Phoenix timeline.
How to deal with it all.
Right. With the truth level maxing out and the system seemingly locking down, how is the public supposed to maintain their sense of self and humanity? If the server is throttling our weather, looping our politics, and the people in charge are debating whether to intentionally crash the system, how do you survive that mentally?
Well, the Parallel Observer highlights a fascinating cultural adaptation to this dilemma. They prominently featured a book that released on Wednesday, July 29th, titled The World Behind My Eyes.
And the book itself isn't like a technical manual or a scientific paper. It's a narrative story.
Right. It's about a girl surviving an incredibly controlling and abusive home by creating a vibrant, secret, beautiful world entirely inside her own mind.
It's a really poignant metaphor. But the publication contextualizes this story as more than that. They view it as a literal blueprint for building a mental escape hatch.
Exactly. They argue that when the external simulated world is glitching and locking down, the only way to maintain inner resilience is to build that mental escape hatch.
There is a fascinating paradox here, though.
Oh, how so?
Think about it. To survive the psychological trauma of being trapped inside a simulated, rendered reality that is breaking down, the authors and artists of the Phoenix timeline are suggesting that you must build yet another simulated reality entirely inside your own imagination.
That is, wow, yeah, that is a paradox.
Yeah.
But the mechanics of why this works, according to the theories in the source, are deeply compelling.
Walk me through it.
Well, the rendering of a physical space, say a chair in a room, requires the central server to calculate light physics, atomic collision detection, gravity, object permanence. All of that takes server load.
Right.
But the theory suggests that human consciousness operates on a separate, non-local architecture.
Oh, I see. So building a mental world takes zero environmental rendering power from the main server.
It is a lag-free partition. Your imagination doesn't require environmental polygons. The publication is essentially highlighting the ultimate sovereignty of human consciousness.
That's actually pretty beautiful.
It is. Even if every physical object around us is a failing variable, even if global events are copy-pasted loops, the capacity for inner imagination remains isolated from the hardware throttling. Building that escape hatch is an act of defiance.
It's just that while the simulation dictates the external parameters of our existence, it cannot render, monitor, or restrict the internal landscape of our minds. You might own the server, but I own the data in my head.
Exactly. And as the physical infrastructure continues to strain under the weight of its own data, that internal partition is going to become the most valuable resource people have.
So let's synthesize all of this overarching theme for the listener, because the data points toward an imminent shift.
Yes. Whether we are looking at hardware throttling, creating an unexplainable heat dome in Phoenix, or scripted, mathematically copied loops in Tehran,
Or the fierce legislative battles over the Clarity Act.
the conclusion drawn by the Parallel Observer is unified. Society is rapidly moving past the point of skepticism about the reality. The geometric patterns in the chaos are just too clear to ignore.
And the publication notes that in the coming days, people are going to be closely tracking the source verifiers to see if they can continue providing accurate data amidst this cascading infrastructure fallout.
Right, and these source verifiers, they are data scientists and systems designed to monitor the base code of the simulation.
They aren't just people looking at thermometers.
No, they operate by tracking anomalies and fundamental constants. They look for microfluctuations in atomic clocks or latency in the speed of light that indicate the server is skipping frames.
And if the hardware is truly failing, the flow of reliable information through these verifiers will probably be the next thing to throttle.
The system is maxed out, and the infrastructure is buckling. It suggests we're rapidly approaching the final chapters of this iteration of reality.
Which leaves you, our listener, with a rather chilling final question to mull over on your own today. If this theory holds true, and our reality is indeed a simulation running on a massive server that is currently overheating, straining, and throttling under the weight of its own data, think about what you do when your computer runs out of space.
You empty the trash.
You delete the large, unnecessary files to keep the operating system from completely failing. So when the system finally decides it absolutely needs to free up some space, what parts of our world get deleted?
It becomes a pure calculation of optimization. How does an algorithm define what is essential for the simulation to continue? And what is entirely expendable?
Next time you walk into a room and feel that little glitch, that split second where the world stutters, just hope you aren't the file taking up too much space. Until next time.